When Gray Zone Warfare was announced, and after I looked into it, I thought, just another game looking to take on Tarkov by being like Tarkov. And while I maintain throwing money into a burn barrel is a more efficient use of developers' money, this one might be a little different. But the real question is, why do devs seem to be trying to get into the extraction shooter genre by following Tarkov's shadow, when they have much more to gain by forging their own path? Well, let's talk about it. This is my usual disclaimer for what I'm about to say. This is just my opinion. As per the norm, inevitably some of you will disagree with some of my points or even my entire premise, and that's 100% okay with me. Make a comment, plead your case, and I'd be happy to have that conversation about it. Let's start off by asking a couple of questions. For those of you who play Tarkov, what would get you to play another game? What features would be enough to entice you? For those of you who don't play Tarkov, but would play an extract game, why not? What features does Tarkov have that keeps you away? I'm curious to see your answers. Comment your answers down below. So, as of right now, there are two obvious players in the extraction genre: Hunt and Escape from Tarkov. I outlined exactly what makes an extract game an extract game in one of my previous videos, so I won't be doing that again here. Over the last year, there have been a good amount of extract shooters announced, some with more fanfare than others. But I've noticed two trends. First is that some of the games are showing that developers still don't understand what makes extraction games appealing. And the second trend is some developers think the only way to be successful is to be a Tarkov clone. For those of you not old enough to remember, loads of studios jumping into a hot genre isn't a new thing. We saw this with MMOs, MOBAs, and Battle Royales. What's typical is 1 to 2 games establish themselves early on and become well known with a degree of success. This is the pioneer phase. The next phase is the free-for-all, where other studios attempt to carve out their own piece of the pie within that potential player population. Many fail. Even the original pioneer games can die in this process, and eventually there will be a small number of well-established games that become the gold standard. I'll refer to this as the stabilization phase. At this point, any new game entering needs something significant in order to make a dent, otherwise they risk immediate failure. Extraction games are in the beginning of their free-for-all phase, and I think in this case there's an added level of confusion because extract games on the surface can resemble survival shooters, looter shooters, as well as BR games. This results in devs trying to figure out how to even approach the space. Which brings me to my first trend. There are a number of games released and announced within the last year. Lists of new and upcoming extraction games made it seem like the market was going to be oversaturated before it even started. But after some time, more details about these games started to emerge, and some had betas to experience. And well, it's clear some have been built with fundamental portions of the genre missing. Some examples to draw from are Hawked, Ascendant, and Hyenas. Hawked is just a glorified BR that happened to have an extract mechanic. Ascendant and Hyenas, before it was cancelled, look to be arena shooters that have extract mechanics. Devs are trying to create existing game types and then just patching on an extract mechanic thinking that'll be enough to capture a market share in the genre. I suspect there are going to be a lot of games that don't even make it to release or die outright fairly shortly after because of this. Then there are a few in development that are operating under what I like to call the shadow of Tarkov. They are being influenced very heavily by Tarkov to the point where I think it is unwise. Before I explain precisely why I think this is a fool's errand, if you're still watching and if you enjoy these types of discussions, hit that like and subscribe button. It helps me out by letting me know I should really make an effort to put more of these out. I appreciate your time and consideration, and now back to the video. I personally believe that the extraction genre has been underserved, and based on the amount of studios jumping into the market, I'm not the only one. But why and how it's been underserved is super important. You see, the extraction genre is an inherently punishing concept. For that reason, the amount of possible players a game can attract is going to be significantly more limited than its more excitement-driven counterparts. The average player isn't signing up to spend their on average 1 hour of game time a day to play a game where they can lose several days worth of progress on a bad night. This, in my mind, is a reasonable assessment of what the average person doesn't want to do with their spare time. Because of this, I don't think there's room for multiple games that are essentially variations of each other within the extraction space. If a game doesn't reach the critical mass it needs to sustain itself, its direct competitor will inherit the remains. And this is where Tarkov comes in. It is a pioneer game, but since it hasn't really had any real competitors, it's done very well within its space, and it's being confused as a model game for the genre. And that's a problem because Tarkov in many ways doesn't buck current trends. It straight up ignores basic game design standards in favor of remaining true to its identity. The result is a player base that really enjoys it because of these features, because of these differences. But in contrast, these features turn off at least as many players as they attract, probably more. My assertion is that if you're a player that likes the kind of game Tarkov is, you're already playing Tarkov and very unlikely to play another game just like it but with less features and less content. Its only other real comparison is Hunt, which is probably as casual an extraction game can get. Basically the opposite of Tarkov on that scale. In my opinion, there are plenty of potential players to attract from within the space between these two extremes. So if you're a developer trying to get into the extraction game space, why would you dive into a corner of that space that has been pretty entrenched player base and still expect to succeed? In my mind, the only way this will potentially result in anything other than setting money on fire is in two different scenarios. The first, the development and upkeep cost for a game is very low and it has a special niche. Beautiful Light is an example case I would use. Gameplay feature-wise, it seems to be appealing to Tarkov players, but it only has 17 devs working on it while having a horror setting. So I can see a possibility of it siphoning off enough Tarkov players to keep itself going, but only time will tell. The second scenario would be if a company had enough funding and know-how to overtake Tarkov completely. Gray Zone Warfare seems to be the potential example case with a well-established studio with plenty of funding. My initial concerns of them historically making mobile games is somewhat tempered by their monetization plan. It is planned as a boxed product, i.e. pay to play, with no microtransactions in-game. We'll see how all that shakes out, but they're still aiming for players already playing Tarkov. Sure, there are already some features announced that will set them apart, but I don't see them attracting new players that aren't already captured by Tarkov. In the end, I think their potential will still be limited when compared to the potential players left waiting for something else. The good news for those players, there seems to be quite a few on their way. Marathon, EVE Vanguard, Division's Heartland, and Arc Raiders, just to name a few. Unfortunately, there's just not a whole lot of information that's solid enough to make a judgment on. I am sure there are those of you who are like me and have been burned enough times by getting overhyped for a game that fell short. Sometimes that's our fault for having unrealistic expectations, but sometimes it's the devs overpromising and underdelivering. Time will tell which games will fail and which will stick around, and I am personally excited to witness it live. If you've watched up until this point, I hope I've entertained you, and if so, consider hitting that like and subscribe button. More will be coming. Thank you for watching, and good hunting.